Welcome everyone. Welcome into Salesforce XR. My name is Amit Chaudhary. I'm the founder of the Salesforce XR and the co-organizer of Farmington Hill Salesforce Developer Group. And today we are going to talk about how to empower admin with the power of the Salesforce DS, GIT and CI/CD. And we will talk about the source-driven development. And let me hand over to our speaker.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Amit. So my name's Luigi Franciosi. I'm a senior application engineer at Quicken Loans, and my current focus has been primarily a lot of DevOps stuff and getting our deployments and environments set up in a place where we have, a stable build and we can deploy frequently and safely with a lot of confidence, given the process that we've adopted that I'm going to show you here today. So as Amit said, I'm going to talk about how to empower admins with a lot of this stuff. I'm going to show you some more of the technical stuff on how to actually set this stuff up and what this all means. And I'm going to do a live demo as well. And that's really where I'm going to get into a lot more of the detail, is actually doing a demo for everybody and showing you guys how you can actually set this stuff up for free. I have some of this stuff hosted on a public GitHub repo that anybody can fork or clone down, and some other stuff that we'll get into in a minute. So I'm going to talk about why DX. It's really the future and the now. I mean, it's been out for a couple of years now. I don't think that there's a lot of people really taking advantage of it, but I think there's a lot of interest in people to understand how they might be able to use it and why they would want to use it. It's very highly customizable and flexible. DX is not just a command line interface, but they also, Salesforce also developed the idea of a scratch org, which is a very short-lived, disposable environment that's meant to do a task or a story, right? You do one little thing, you pull your changes out, you push your stuff up to a version control system, and you get rid of that environment. And it can really help with keeping your changes stable. And what I mean by that is making sure that, you don't have a lot of people in one environment where a lot of people are maybe playing around, trying around some new stuff. And then you might accidentally push something up to prod or another environment that's breaking something that, was something you didn't want to go, you didn't want to go anyways. Because of the command line interface tool that supports Salesforce DX, it's extremely customizable and flexible, and it allows for a modern CI/CD process. Because you can script the commands through the command line, you can really make your process what you want it to be. And so I'm going to show you something that I think works really well, but you'll have this stuff to take home with you so you can play with and modify it however you'd like to. So in a little more detail, I'm going to talk about the source API versus the metadata API, how admins can use this. Circle CI is going to be the CI/CD provider that I'm going to demo, and then I'm going to show you a slide with a lot of good resources, stuff that's really helped me a lot in learning a lot of this stuff. So as I mentioned, there's a command line interface which has a suite of tools available to you. They're adding more tools and more commands to it every day. But even if you don't adopt source, using it for scratch orgs and things like that, it's still a really nice way for you to interact with Salesforce. You log into it, you can manage users, you can insert data, you can do a tremendous amount with it without actually having to use scratch orgs and things like that. There's still a lot of really, really good benefits to it. And then scratch orgs, as I mentioned, they're short-lived, disposable environments that is basically just a shell of an environment. And the reason DX enables source-driven development is because when you create a new scratch org, it's empty. It doesn't have anything in it, but you deploy whatever your latest is from your version control system. So if you're using something like GitHub and you have everything tracked in there, when you go to spin up a new scratch org, you pull down the latest from your version control, and then you deploy it to that. So you're always up to date with whatever's in your version control. And in theory, the only things in your version control are things that you want to track, right? Or things that are part of your build that you want to keep, as opposed to maybe something you're just playing around with, right? You don't want to actually commit that to your version control. Maybe that's in a Sandbox or another developer org. That stuff won't come down into your scratch org because you'll have that local project local to your computer, and then you deploy that directly to your scratch org. And I'll display what that looks like as well. So the metadata API and the source API are a little different. So if you're familiar with the metadata API today and maybe deploying stuff through a package.xml and in the AMP migration tool, or maybe the workbench, you might be familiar with the format of the files, right? Which are just huge files. So if you look at, the account object or any object file in metadata, which is over here on the right, it's just one massive file. And the source tracked API breaks that down into more nested foldered metadata that makes it a lot easier to visualize your changes. And it also makes it easier for the metadata files to work with a version control system. In addition to that, the new structure of it, in a scratch org, you also get source tracking. And what I mean by that is, as I mentioned, when you create a new scratch org, you have your latest from your version control that you pull down to your local machine. You push that out to your scratch org. When you make changes in your scratch org, you can run a status command, which I'll demonstrate on the command line interface, to see what's changed in that scratch org. So when you can see exactly, maybe you did play around with some stuff, but I can see that maybe I just added one field, maybe I just modified a profile, maybe I just created one class or made a tweak to one class or trigger, and it'll show me what changed. As opposed to the metadata API, I got to keep track of maybe everything that I changed on an Excel sheet, or maybe I have a custom object built that, is showing me what my deploy tracker or something like that. This does it systematically through the command line interface to actually keep track of it for you, which is a really, really nice efficiency gain, and really makes it easier to use. So it might seem like DX is just for developers, but if you have a really good process in place, it can be really easily adapted by your admins. In fact, today we actually have all of our admins at Quicken using DX for all of their changes, all of their declarative changes. Our entire app, our entire project is tracked in our version control system. So that includes page layouts, that includes profiles, permissions, record types, all the declarative stuff, fields, pick list values, as well as code, obviously. And so with just a few simple commands, you can enable your admins to actually be able to spin up a new scratch org, make their changes, pull their changes down, and then actually commit them to a version control system. And then after that version control system, that's really where the power of that CI/CD pipeline comes in, and it's actually going to be able to deploy that stuff automatically to the next environment. So say I have maybe 3 environments in my pipeline, like a test or a dev, a test, a beta, or UAT or SIT, whatever you call your environments. In today's world, maybe if you're working in a large enterprise where we have admins and developers, and you don't allow people to make changes directly in a sandbox, or you don't use change sets, maybe you're only using the AMP migration tool, then maybe when an admin is ready for their changes to go to the next environment, maybe test or beta, they have to wait until somebody else is able to deploy that stuff for them, right? Until somebody else has that stuff packaged in and is ready to deploy that stuff for them. So there's wasted time, them just sitting around waiting to get that stuff in that environment for them to be able to test or demo or perform UAT, whatever the case may be. So by automating this stuff, we really make your process a lot more efficient and enable admins to get their stuff from beginning to end if you do have strict controls in place, like a like checking stuff into a version control system and, deploying stuff, through the metadata API. So really it's just a few commands, if you think about it, that they're going to need to know to actually do this stuff. So here I have 6 commands. There's actually going to be one more. I'm going to show you a script that actually builds a scratch org from beginning to end. That makes it just a little bit easier for the admins, or even for developers, really, to spin up a new scratch org. And I'm going to talk about why that's important as well. So really, if I just look at this right here, it's really not a tremendous amount more that my admins have to learn to be able to leverage DX, the command line interface, and track stuff in a version control system, which is probably something that most admins aren't doing today, unless they're using maybe a third-party tool that has a nice GUI on top of Git to, point and click and make that experience of getting in a version control system really easy. Yeah. So Circle CI is what I'm gonna demo here. So taking a step back, if we think about it, the front end of this process is that scratch org, right? So pulling my latest down from my version control system, developing in a scratch org, and then committing to my version control system. And then once I commit to my version control system, then I'm gonna kick off a build. Circle CI is just one provider of CI/CD processes. Travis CI, Jenkins CI, there's a bunch out there. Salesforce has some public GitHub repos that actually have sample scripts on how to get that stuff set up for like Travis and Jenkins. So if you're using that stuff today, there might already be some stuff out there that is available to you that might make it a little easier for you to set up. But today we're going to demo Circle CI. I'm going to talk about workflows, pipelines, artifacts, the the ability to rerun jobs. Yeah. So you guys are all going to see this in the demo I do, but I just kind of wanted to show you what Circle CI looks like and kind of explain it to you up front and then explain it to you again as I'm going through the process. So this first thing you see here is a workflow that got kicked off as soon as I committed something to my version control. I have my GitHub hooked up to Circle CI, and whenever I push a commit or I open a pull request, I trigger a build. So this build has a lot more steps in it. So I can see that I'm doing all this stuff, and all of this is happening automatically. You can see right here on the right-hand side the amount of time it takes for it to execute. So all this stuff is happening in the background. And all of this is what I told it to do. This is all programmed into Circle CI, so it makes it completely flexible. I can have different checks in here. Maybe I want to run all my unit tests. Maybe I want to run a code scanner like PMD or linting in here on my project to verify that it builds. And that's going to talk back to my version control system to provide me with gated commits, meaning that these checks have to all be green to be able to commit or to be able to merge onto, maybe my upstream branch. Before I can go on to master, I have to pass all these checks. So you can see here, this is what I just talked about, one of these quality gates. I can see that it checked, and that's why it actually allowed me to merge. So if I did not have this green check here and maybe it failed, then I'd have a red X and it would say, blocked until, the build is fixed. So it keeps your branches more stable, knowing that I'm pushing this stuff. Maybe I have all my unit tests run. So when I check in my new code, or I check in, maybe I changed the field type or something like that, if I broke my unit test, that actually happens before it deploys to my environment, just because I checked it with my unit test through an automated run. This is just another view in Git that kind of shows you exactly, what checks you ran. It's just a little, it's Circle CI specific as opposed to the conversation in GitHub. And then after the workflow, when I actually merge onto a branch, I have my pipeline here, and I'm going to show you this in more detail. So I have my downstream environments. And then here's all the resources that I'm not going to go through all these right now, but they'll be made available to you afterwards. So I'm going to go right into the demo now. So if you're not using Visual Studio Code, I would recommend it. It's free. Salesforce actually has a built-in plugin to make using the command line interface easier for you in Visual Studio Code. So if you don't like running all your commands through the command line interface, there's some point and click options and some shortcuts through the Visual Studio Code GUI that make it easier for you to maybe run that stuff. I personally like to run the commands. It helps me get familiar with it. It helps me, Salesforce does a good job of providing updates to you. So maybe if you're running an old command that they're deprecating, it gives you warnings and alerts in the, right in the terminal, right in the output, so you know what's getting deprecated, etc. So then with source-driven development, with the source API, the folder structure is different too. So we have this main folder here called Force App, which is just the default. You could name this whatever you wanted to. And then we have our project right here, which has, our foldered metadata down here, holding all of our components. There's a project file, a SFDX project file. This is created automatically when you create a new DX project. And it just gives me a path to where my project is. I can set my API version here as well. The config file dictates what features I have enabled or disabled for my Scratch org. I'm not going to go into too much detail there. But what I do want to show you is this. So this is a simple script that's going to automatically build a Scratch org for me when I run it. It's just a shell script. So if you're using a Mac or Windows operating system, you need some type of Linux terminal. So for Windows, we use Git Bash. It works really well, and it allows us to have the same script operating on both machines. And then Circle CI is actually running a Docker container as well. So these shell scripts run nicely on there as well. By keeping the scripts in my version control system, I can track it. And the script actually can act as a blueprint in a way for my Scratch org, because I might have to do specific things to get this environment up to, set up the way I need it to be set up. And what I mean by that is I might have metadata in my project that's dependent on managed packages or unmanaged packages, or I might have, maybe I want to set up a specific user. I want to create a user with specific permissions to be able to test something very specific, or maybe I want to automatically insert data that's structured in a specific way. I can track all that stuff inside of Git, inside of my version control system. And whenever I pull down the latest from my version control, I'll have that there. And then whenever somebody runs this script, my new Scratch org script, they're automatically going to be building it the same way everybody else on my team is. Okay. So all this is doing is prompting me. I'll display it to you. All it's doing is just waiting for me to give it an alias and a duration. And then it's actually going to create a Scratch org for me running this command right here. So before I run this real quick, to give you a brief overview of the commands, they go with a namespace, topic, and a command. So force being the namespace. There's a plugin architecture to the Salesforce command line interface, and there are people who actually develop plugins for commands that maybe are missing, or commands that they want to do an ultra specific thing. So they might have a different namespace. Like I could have SFDX Luigi org create, and maybe that command operates in a slightly different manner than this command. I'm not going to go into all that, but yeah, just so you're aware. And then the topic is org and then create. So if I run this with my help flag, I can see that org is my topic, and then I have a bunch of other commands. So there's clone, create, delete, display, list, open status. I'm going to list out what orgs I have. I'm going to talk about the Dev Hub real quick. The Dev Hub is very important. That's going to be your production org. Salesforce limits you to 100 active scratch orgs at a time, and you can only request up to 200 scratch orgs in a 24-hour period, and they track that through your Dev Hub. So having your Dev Hub authorized, which I can see is denoted here by having this D, and I can see that it's connected, is where the command line is going to go out to verify that I'm within those limits to create it. So once I create the actual scratch org itself, I'm going to deploy some code to it, just running this command. This command is going to use my definition file. It's going to use an alias. So aliases are really nice when I run a command. Say I want to deploy something. Instead of typing out an entire username at my email, right, whatever it may be, if I have an alias, I could just deploy it, target it against my alias right there. And so all this is doing is taking in the alias that it's going to read and the duration. It can be anywhere from 1 to 30 days. That's it. So if you have stuff in your scratch org and you're approaching the expiration date and you forget to pull that stuff down, there's potential that you could lose it because there is that hard 30-day cap. This S flag is going to make it my default username. So if I didn't want to specify, if I just wanted to run a command like this command, absent of calling out what username, the target that I wanted to execute against, is gonna deploy against whatever is my default username at any given time. And right now I have that set to this scratch org. Okay. So I don't have a lot of different commands in here. I wanted to, keep it simple and straightforward and just show you what a template might look like for something that you might want to, put in there. So there's these data tree commands that can import data, like I was saying. Here's that user command. I can create a specific user. It's really, really flexible. There's a tremendous amount of commands and of topics rather, and then commands itself. So you can see here, I can work with Apex code. I can create a new class. I can execute anonymous Apex. Auth is how I actually connect these orgs together. My computer to my org. I can work with Lightning or org components. And just an FYI, if you have heard about Lightning web components or you've thought about maybe playing around with them, you actually have to create them in an IDE through the command line interface. You can't actually go into a Salesforce org, go through the setup menu, or go through the dev console and create a new Lightning web component like you can an Apex class or a trigger or a bundle. Unlocked packages, maybe some of you have heard of that, maybe some of you haven't. I'm not really going to get into that today, but that is something else that DX offers as well. All right. So this is really the part where I feel like we're really going to empower admins the most, is by giving them the ability to create a new environment, to work on a task or a story in a scratch org and work with source-driven development. So I'm going to check out my master. I'm going to stash those changes. I'm going to make sure I have the latest by doing git pull origin. If you're not familiar with Git, working with a remote, like an enterprise GitHub, where I have a hosted GitHub repo somewhere out on the internet that I have linked up to my machine to collaborate with, right? So that's one central place where multiple developers and admins are pulling stuff down to their local and pushing stuff up into one central place that we can all work from. So I can see what my remote is right here. This is that public GitHub repo that I mentioned earlier that's hosted this stuff. So I got a bunch of changes. That's good. All right. Now I'm going to check out a feature branch. Okay, so now any work, I have master as a protected branch, so I'm not going to be able to commit directly onto master. If you're not too familiar with Git, it might seem a little complex, but it's a pretty straightforward, intuitive tool that once you get the hang of it, it becomes really, really easy to use. There are some, potentials for like Git conflicts, merge conflicts, things like that, getting out of date, but all stuff that can be prevented by making sure you stay up to date regularly with the latest, like pulling from the origin and keeping your local clean. So I'm going to apply that stash, which gave me this. All right. Okay. So now I'm on my demo branch. Now I'm going to run this script. To run a shell script, all you do is do ./new. Okay, so now it's going to prompt me for an alias. I'm going to call this demo, and it's going to ask me for a duration. I'm going to say 5 days. Depending on your story, you might want the full 30 days, but I wouldn't advise that you always make one for 30 days because the intent behind this is to have this environment as a short-lived, disposable environment. Okay. So now what it's doing is just waiting to actually build the scratch org itself. So when I request a new scratch org, I'm going to my dev hub to verify that I'm within my limits, that I can still do this. And it's going to give me a new scratch org with nothing in it. And then I'm going to automatically deploy all of the latest from my source to that scratch org. This can take anywhere from a couple seconds to a couple minutes, depending on Salesforce's resources at the time. It's making a call out to Salesforce to generate a new scratch org, similar to how you create a new developer org in Trailhead. So, okay, so I have too many active scratch orgs. So I'm going to go ahead and delete one. Yeah, in like a Trailhead org, I think you can only request 5 a day and you can only have one active one. So I'm going to go ahead and delete it. Okay, so it marked it for deletion. So if I run my list command again, all right, I see that I don't have any active scratch orgs. I'm still authorized against my dev hub. So I'm going to do new scratch org again, demo. I'm going to say 5 again. So if I look here, because I have the plugin, I can see that through the Salesforce plugin, it actually said this little plug right here in the bottom of my screen. It says demo. It automatically set it as my default. So if I look here, this is some of the plugin stuff this is some of the features of the Salesforce plugin through VS Code that they offer. So I can, go through this menu to create stuff. This little window allows me to open it. Okay. And cool. So here you go. Now I have a brand new environment for me. that has the latest from my local machine, because I pulled down the latest from my version control for my remote, and that got deployed to this scratch org. So again, right here is where I actually created it. And then right here is my push command. I don't have a lot of metadata in this project. It's just a demo thing. So it happened pretty fast. Depending on the complexity of the script, it could take anywhere from, you know, what you just saw, maybe a minute, up to maybe 15 minutes. So the packages that you install are requests that gets made out to Salesforce, and that's gonna only start downloading when it's available. So, you know, if you have maybe 3 or 4 managed packages that you need to install, then it could take time to build that scratch org. There are a few pilot features that are going to become globally available in the very near future. But if you're not in the pilot right now and you want to start using this, you're going to have to install all of those packages, which there's a command to do. It's SFDX force package install, and then you install it with a package ID. I can see here that everything deployed accurately. Succeeded, great. So say I'm an admin and I want to, you know, I need a new field. So I'll just make a new field on my account object. It'll be just a text field. "200 characters long. I don't know. I'm going to give it to this guy. I'm not going to add it to these page layouts. Well, I'm going to add it to the regular account page layout. Okay, cool. So now, I mean, you know, I could go deeper, right? This is just a demo. I could go in and add this to other page layouts, make a brand new page layout. I could reference this in, you know, a trigger. Maybe I wanted to, you know, validate that this was filled in, or whatever the case may be. The point is, now I have something different in my scratch org that's not on my local, and the source API is going to have tracked that for me. So if I go back to my terminal, now again, remember the S set it as my default username, which I also know it's my default because the plugin is showing it right here. So if I run status without any other arguments, it's going to automatically know that it's my that the command needs to run against my default username. And so boom, right there, I can see that my remote added my account.some text field, and I modified the account layout field. If I didn't set the scratch org as my default username, I would have to use this U argument and give it a value of demo, which is the alias of my scratch org, to make sure that it ran against it. So if I did have multiple scratch orgs, right, maybe I had 2 or 3 because I was working on 2 different things at the same time, then, you know, you can only have one default username set at a time. So I might need to specify it based on the alias that I set. I'm going to pull that stuff down. Status is just showing me what changed. Pull is actually going to bring it down for me. Okay, cool. And it pulled the source. And so now, one of the other benefits of using VS Code is not just the Salesforce DX plugins, but all the other plugins that support development, like Git plugins. So I have a really nice little GUI here that shows me what changed. So I don't even have to run the Git command line commands to actually get my stuff moved. If I want to go through the entire point and click interface, I can do that. So I pulled down this page layout. I'll stage that. I pulled down this field. I'll stage that. I'm not going to commit this. And I modified this, so I'll stage that too. So I could go through my command line to do what I just did, but when you make a change and Git tracks a change, it's going to track it, and then it's going to keep it as tracked until you commit it, right? And I'm going to commit this to my feature branch with a commit message, and I can do that all through here. Okay. And so now, if I want to push my stuff, I can publish this change to my remote. So I've just committed something to my feature branch, which means that now this branch has more than what my master branch has. And it's on my local right now, tracked in my local Git. So now I'm going to push it to the remote. I can see that it's running. Okay. So now I'm in my public GitHub repo, which is going to become my collaboration space for my team if I adopt this process. And I'm going to open up a new pull request. And I'm going to pull my demo branch onto master, which is going to merge my new changes into my master. All right, so now all of a sudden, I see some stuff here. I can see that my Circle CI job is starting to build. And so this is what's going to be your gated commit. So now, because I have Circle CI or maybe any other CI/CD provider hooked up to my GitHub, my version control, I'm automatically running some checks in the background, and I'm not going to let you merge until it passed. These checks pass, so I'm going to be able to merge. But you saw the only reason it gave me that button was because I'm an admin. But I can actually enact different levels of checks for admins too. I can make them have to have all these checks passed too, which is nice. So if I go to Circle CI and I go to my jobs, I can see right here, I just pushed this a minute ago. And let's look at all the stuff it did. So the first thing it did was build a Docker image for me. The Docker image is where this stuff is running. I checked out my code. So it got everything from GitHub. I have GitHub connected to Circle CI. I created a DX folder. I downloaded the CLI, installed the CLI, and I authorized the CLI. So you need to authorize the CLI to a org with JWT. JWT uses server keys to verify that a user can access, and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay. So in the resources that I have, Salesforce has done a really good job of showing you how to step through this process step by step. So I'm not going to get into a tremendous amount of detail here, but I am going to show you. So this is my Dev Hub, and for the CLI to work, I have it authorized against my Dev Hub to be able to run some more checks. Maybe I want to run some unit tests. Maybe I want to create a scratch org as a part of my CI/CD process. Maybe I want to spin up a new environment, run my tests in there, and then and then rip apart that environment, delete it, and get rid of it. I would have to have my CLI authorized to my Dev Hub, and I would do that with a JWT flow that happens through a connected app. So right here, Circle CI I have set up as a connected app. There's a consumer key, and then there's a digital certificate. The digital certificate, the documentation that I have referenced shows you how to do this step by step, and it's really easy to do. In fact, I actually use some of the steps from a public Salesforce GitHub repo to help me get through this, to help me set this stuff up. So when I created this, when I created this connected app, I uploaded that certificate to it. And that JWT grant is going to read that certificate and verify that it's still valid. I set an expiration date to it for 2020. So it's good for a year. And then it's verifying via OAuth, a token. So you have to let it, you have to enable these accesses. You actually don't need this Visualforce one. I don't know why that's there, but you view data via the web, manage your data through the API, and then perform requests at refresh the token and offline access. So really, it has to look like this. I have a permission set assigned to my user that's actually running. The auth is running against my username, and I set up a permission set to grant me access to this connected app. Okay, so going a little bit behind the scenes to hopefully provide a little bit of clarity to what I just said. Circle CI is built by this YAML file. So this YAML file is really dictating everything that you see inside of Circle CI. There are environment variables that I have set in Circle CI that hold some stuff like my endpoint, my consumer key, which consumer key is actually pretty frustrating to me because there's so many different names for it. But if I go back to my app, just so everybody's clear, it's right here. This is my consumer key, not my consumer secret. That's what you have to have set for your client ID. So the connected app calls it the consumer key, but the argument in the command is the client ID. The JWT key file, that's the server key that I'm going to show you where you can see a step-by-step process to actually create that. And then more environment variables that I'll show you. Salesforce has their stuff. So this is where I got their stuff from. I do it a little differently at QL, but for ease of this, I wanted you guys to have a resource that you can continually go back to see how they did it. And this is how some guys at Salesforce set it up, actually decrypting the server key. So they store the server key encrypted in GitHub, and then they decrypt it using these commands. So they've created a decryption key and a decryption initialization vector that they've stored as a environment variable in Circle CI. Circle CI does a good job of masking it. So it's safe. But these are all my commands that I'm running. So I have them listed up here and anchored. Various commands here. The Docker image I'm using is a free Docker image provided by Circle CI, which is nice. It's just using Node. It has a version. So if I wanted to use my own Docker image, I could do that. I didn't want to get too in the weeds on that because there are some free resources to you available. And really the only thing we need to do to support this is request that Docker image, install the CLI on it. Yeah. So I can run my tests as a part of the step. I have a deploy job here, which runs through. So these are all the commands that you see up here. So I can list out all my commands, and then I can just kind of list them step by step from that anchor. I think it just makes it a little easier to read. So this job represents what you saw when I pushed that commit. When I opened up that pull request, it just ran this, which is spinning up the environment and authorizing in. I'm going to show you what happens. My unit tests are broken right now. So I'm going to show you an example of a failed build that's going to prevent me from merging onto master until it gets fixed. And then the pipeline is where you really have that continuous delivery where I'm actually deploying to subsequent environments. So all this is saying is run this step up here, which is my setup environment. So it's creating that Docker image, and it's installing the CLI, and it's authorizing my dev hub, and it, I can actually deploy stuff to a target. I'm saying that my deploy dev requires setup environment, and you can give it a context. So let's go into Circle CI to kind of show you a little bit more. So a context is a suite of environment variables. So I can set a context here called dev, and I can have the same variable name under dev, but I could have a different environment, right? So maybe dev is my dev username, and then test context is my test username, maybe a different endpoint, maybe a different consumer key, definitely a different consumer key, definitely a different username. But I could still use the same decryption, initialization vector, and keys for my managed app if I install the same certificate to it from the one that I generated. So my contexts allow me to deploy to different environments. So I don't have this set up, but I wanted to show you that what it could look like is this. If I wanted to, if I had a bunch of sandboxes at my disposal, I could actually have dev set up here, and I would deploy to dev. I would be authoring into that environment with that username and that client ID, that consumer key. And then test would be a different one. So every time I run that authorization command, I'm authoring into the target environment that I want to deploy to. And then I have manual steps. So when this pipeline runs, and you can see here that I have it filtered to only run on master. So I have a lot of flexibility where I can say, I don't need to run all these deploys. In fact, I don't want to run these deploys when I just push a feature branch and open up a new pull request. I only want to run this when I actually merge this onto my master branch, because that's only when I know I'm ready, at least I think I'm ready to deploy my stuff. So if you wanted to, maybe you didn't use master, maybe you called it head, or maybe you had another branch that was parallel to master, maybe called develop. It's just whatever the name of the branch is. And then I'll show this to you after I push this. After I merge that other commit, it's gonna require me to manually deploy. So those are contexts, and then in Circle CI itself, I have, where is it? No. There we go. My environment variable. So this is my project for Luigi Force, my public GitHub. And I have the same environment variables here that you saw inside of the context. So I have the same variable, which makes my scripts more reusable, but the value that I have is going to be different in each context so that I can target a different environment to deploy to. So we saw that this workflow was successful. So now I'm going to merge this onto master. And that's going to kick off another job, another workflow. So I can see right here, it started running this automatically. And because I have that filtered on master and I have that pipeline there, this view is going to look different. So now I actually have my deployment pipeline of what I want to actually go. You could deploy to different environments simultaneously. You don't have to have manual gate set up. You could deploy automatically as soon as one step passes. Allows you a lot of flexibility. And what's cool is you can go directly back to the commit itself through this little hash here, and I can see, oh, okay, this is actually what I'm running here. Okay, and it broke. So there you go. So an example of automated deployment that my target didn't have something. So That's pretty cool, right? Like I tried to deploy something automatically. I see that there's an error there. So now I know what I have to go back and fix. It tells me exactly what is wrong. So I can go ahead and fix that. So what I'm going to do to show this to you guys again, where is, I'm just going to delete this. So you could do it directly from here. It'll, I'll call it a patch. I'll create a new branch directly on here. And I'm going to say, I'm going to delete that, propose file change. So that created a new branch when I did that. Instead of committing directly onto master, I created a new branch. And so I'm going to create a new pull request. And it's going to run that check real quick. Looks like it all passed. It's going to report back. Now I'm going to merge it. I'm going to go back here. I see that I just queued up a new build. It's going to auth in and then try and deploy. This is going to deploy my entire project. But what you could do is, you know, create some custom scripts to deploy the delta, deploy a change, only what you want to change. It's as creative as you want to get with it. So this is going to try and deploy. So while it's going to download the CLI first. Okay, cool. So I deployed my two text fields. I can see my pipeline here. That all passed, and now it's on hold. I have a little pause button here because in my YAML, I said requires, you know, this deploy dev happens automatically after my setup my setup environment process runs, and then it's going to wait because it's an approval type. That's all that means. So if I click that button, it clicks approve. It says I approved it, and now it's trying to deploy test. I'm not actually using context here, so I'm not actually deploying to any different environment. It's actually deploying to it's actually deploying to the same place, which is just my, it's this org. So if I go here, I can see the different deploys that happened. So there's that one that failed, and then here's all my successful ones. But again, if I did have those different contexts set, right? If I had a context beta and I had my beta username and I had my beta client ID in there, it would auth into that environment and deploy to that environment. That's basically it, I think. I don't know, Amit, do you want to start going into questions?
First of all, I want to say this is really a perfect session and lots of information you pass, and I really like it personally. So one question I want to ask here, I hope that will be helpful for other audience as well. So whenever you want to start a new development, and then every time you are creating a scratch org for each branch, or you are creating a scratch org and working on the different branches based on your time allowed?
I would recommend that you would build it. So it depends, right? How big your team is and what your limits are available to you, because you can only request 200 scratch orgs a day and you can only have 100 active scratch orgs. So if I have this CI/CD pipeline, maybe I have a scratch org being built on here that I'm running my unit tests on and things like that. That's going to take up a portion of my limit, and then my dev teams too. So I would suggest creating a new feature branch for each story and working out of a different scratch org for each one. Depending on the complexity, it should build in just a couple minutes. So, you just go get a coffee while your scratch org builds, and then, you have a nice new clean environment where you want to actually develop in.
I got it. And one more question, like especially for the admin, like who is building the scratcher for them? Like it's like DevOps teams is doing that, or admin is doing from themselves? Because I know if you want to create the scratcher, you need access to your production org, because for the dev hub, without that you can't create. And ideally in the normal project, we don't want all the developer and admin should have an access into production. So I hope like dedicated team is doing that, right?
So that's a great point. So the way we handle it is we actually only have our users. We do have all our users in our production org, but only as a standard user. And we have a permission set that gives them access to the scratch org info object. And by having access to the scratch org info object, that's the only thing you need in production access to be able to build a scratch org. But certainly, if you did have a dedicated DevOps team, they could certainly build those scratch orgs for you. And what's cool is you could create a definition file for each user. So say I did want a DevOps team to create my scratch orgs for me. I could have a definition file, which is just, a little, it looks just like one of these, just a JSON file with the specific attributes. So maybe I have one for Luigi that has my, email on it. So when I create that scratch org, I automatically create that user with my email. So I'd have like a Luigi definition file and a Mitt definition file, things like that. But again, to have access to production, you could even have them as read-only or an API-only user, as long as they have access to that scratch org info object. That's the only access they need in production to be able to create a new scratch org. And just while we're on the topic of this object, you can actually create custom fields on here. So let me show you this. When you create a new scratch org, it writes back to Salesforce, and I can see, details about my scratch org. It's active for 5 days. I got this ID. I got this, maybe some features I have enabled. Maybe I put a namespace on it. So if I wanted to create custom fields on it, maybe I could have like a release field, right? That shows what release it's a part of, and maybe I could customize my CI/CD process around that release specifically.
And one more question, like in the dev org, we have a limit of 6 or 7 scratch org, right? And what about your production? You have, or what is the limit over there, or we can raise a case in Salesforce and increase the limit, or is based on the enterprise and which edition you have?
Yeah, that's a great question. I believe it's just 200 scratch orgs. You can request up to 200 scratch orgs in any 24-hour period, and you can have 100 active scratch orgs.
Okay, so let me unmute others so that if somebody have any question, they can ask. So I unmuted everyone. Anybody have any question, feel free to ask. There were a couple of questions I already answered on the chat window. If you are totally new, how to use DX, I added a couple of link over there. You can look into that and learn the command. And apart from that, if you are totally new with the VS Code, I share it already one of our YouTube recording. You can go through that. You can see how you can set up the VS Code and everything. And apart from that, for JWT flow, I share one blog post into the chat. You can go through that, and even I share one video. If you are totally new, you can learn about how you can use the JWT flow, and the JWT flow how you can download the open SSL file and create your own certificate and upload into the connected app. So everything we did in the past, and I also already shared the link of it. You can go through that. And this is like last time we did on Junkin with the Junkin, and this time this Circle CLI we are using to kick off everything. The main file, whatever is the major difference, that's this particular YAML file, and we already walked through that one. So feel free if you have any question.
I'll jump in. First of all, thank you for putting this together. That's been an excellent demonstration, Luigi. And as someone who's kind of novice to this, scratch orgs have always been something that I want to use. Obviously, I've used it in all the trailheads and whatnot. But in real life, I've never been able to get one stood up. And I think I may have had an aha moment here when and sorry if I butcher this name, VTAP, had asked, can we create the scratch orgs in sandboxes? Which obviously is where we're all working.
Right.
So, and I know that where I've worked in the past, we've had DevHub turned on.
Yeah.
In production, whatever, but I've never been able to spin up a scratch org off of the sandbox. And so where or how do we go about actually using these scratch orgs?
Okay, so yeah, so
I mean, I know you have to have DevHub turned on. That is obviously a very first thing to do, and we've done that. So anyway, continue on.
So I'll show you. So in the script I have to create a new scratch org, right there, you need the CLI. Even if you don't have it scripted, you need the command line interface to actually create a new scratch org. Now, if you're using a third-party tool like, I believe it's, what is it, GearSet. GearSet has like a GUI to actually like point and click and create a scratch org. I don't know exactly how they're doing it. I'm sure they're running DX commands. I'm sure you probably have to auth into your DevHub as well. But really all you need to do is, let's start from scratch.
Okay. So, before you go on though, I mean, yes, I mean, I know you have to use the SFDX, but what I've always had defined as what I call my DevHub is a sandbox, and it won't let me create one off of that. I always get an error. So where can we create a scratch org off of? Does it have to be a production org?
Yes.
Or can
it has to be a production org. Yes.
Okay. Yes. So if you don't have access to prod, then you don't have access to a scratch org.
Well, so correct. Yes. So again, right, like that's the kind of the concern that Amit brought up. To get around that, right, to get access to prod, you just need access to that scratch org info object. And if licenses are a concern, maybe it makes sense to dedicate one person, one license to create those scratch orgs, and then create you as a user in it, or give you the user access to it.
Okay. Yeah, that, like I said, that was kind of an aha moment that, okay, that would explain why I can't create scratch orgs, because I don't have access to the production environment.
Right.
Which to me, that's always been kind of a, well, I mean, I know Salesforce tends to, silo a lot of things, and what works in one place doesn't work somewhere else. And to me, it would make it easier if it was just consistent.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay. Thanks a lot. This has been, like I said, this has been very informative and, very good. Thanks.
Awesome.
And thanks, Amit, for putting this together.
Thank you so much. Any other question anybody want to ask?
Luigi and Amit, this is Manish. I just have a couple of questions. Are you able to hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Yep. So I was just trying to set up similar kind of a environment and CI/CD process for one of my projects. So the issue I am facing currently is my source, because it is from a sandbox. It is there in the MD API format, Metadata API. So I tried to use the convert commands which have been provided by Salesforce and convert it to source format,
Yep.
and then I mean, you get it into a temp folder and do stuff. But the challenge I'm facing there is, in my repository it is there in source MD API format, but now I
Okay.
have converted it to SFDX format, right? So how do you narrow this gap in terms of having your version control system upgraded with SFDX format, rather than going back and forth converting it from MD API to source and then from source back to MD API?
Well, I guess I guess I would respond with a question. Well, why are you converting it back and forth? Why aren't you just changing it to source format and tracking it like that?
No, I understand that we need to use source. We cannot use source format to deploy changes back to Sandbox. So that's why we convert it back.
You actually can. So they so Salesforce they've updated that. So if I look here, so there's two deploy commands. There's a push and there's a deploy. So if I actually use the deploy command, I'm actually deploying source formatted metadata to a sandbox.
Uh-huh.
So you can use this command as opposed to push, which is what you would use to push to a scratch org. You could use deploy to deploy to a sandbox.
Right. So for you to use deploy, it should be there in MD API format, right?
No.
No.
It's source format.
Okay.
Yep. And
Okay. Yeah, please go ahead. No,
go.
the other question or the challenge what I was facing is, when I do that conversion, right, like from my previous structure to SFDX structure, and I open that, I mean, I try to read those files in VS Code, then I'm just not able to make that factor in where I try to make it in line with my VCS, I mean version control. Any suggestions on that front? Because I'm sorry if you had covered that, I joined a bit late. So
You have your local project in source or metadata format.
in metadata, which is like the older structure,
Right.
which is not in SFDX
Right.
format.
And you can't track it in Git. You can't. It's not showing up in your version control. It should. I mean, it will.
No, let me give you a proper context. I hope, Amit, I'm not taking much time here. I'm sorry.
You can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So the thing is, in, let's say, in my version control, because the repository has been created, and let's say it is from a older generation, so it is there in the older format structure, and I try to clone that repository, and because in VS Code right now, we cannot sync up with our orgs if it is not in SFDX format, correct?
No.
It should be there in source format, right? Otherwise,
I would advise that you would track it in source format, but the CLI allows you to interact with sandboxes and scratch orgs through the metadata API or the source API. So even through the metadata commands. Well, so metadata I can only deploy through here.
So,
Yeah, is that your issue?
No. My challenge is, let us say if I just clone my repository and I open it in VS Code
Uh-huh.
as is, then what is happening is I am not able to get the commands of authorize an org or any other.
Oh, you're not in a project. You need to be in a
Correct.
Salesforce project. Yeah.
Correct. So
Yeah.
that's what is
So,
my question.
So
so
you could still track your metadata in a Salesforce project. So if I did,
So can I answer here, Logi? So what you actually can do, there is a with the VS Code, there's another thing as well. What you can do, you can use the non-scratcher concept here, and in that you can go with the metadata file and
yeah,
the manifest file with the package.xml. In that way, you can directly authorize your sandbox and deploy. And
right,
whatever
Amit.
situation
But
is that, I will
Yeah,
recommend
yeah.
if you
he,
already have. I'm sorry, Logi, you can go ahead.
Um,
yeah, I think the problem
Amit,
was
so
you
yeah,
don't have you're not in a project. So you just need to have a project set up. So if I look here, right now, my source format metadata is coexisting with my metadata, right? My old format metadata right here. I just have two different directories in here. So when you interact with a scratch org, you still need it to go to a project, which would be the path to your source formatted. And then if you still wanted to interact with metadata, you would have to convert between the two directories. But
absolutely, yeah.
yeah, but I would just suggest, I mean, if you're going to adopt scratch orgs as part of your process, I would
Mhm.
just update your repo to be source formatted. Just change all of it to the source format and deploy it. Maybe you create a new repository or just update your existing one. But I would just suggest that for ease of use.
Hmm. I agree with your point. Yeah, thank you. And just as Amit said, we could still use that using the manifest project, create project with manifest. But what is happening in that scenario is that when I spin off something like that in VS Code, I'm not able to sync it back to my version control system. So Amit, if you have any previous session which explains that, I'll be happy to go through that because I just don't want to take much time here.
Yep.
So
So
anyways, thanks Luigi for your
So,
valuable
okay.
inputs.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what the issue is because like even if you do have your manifest files, Git should still track that as a change. So if you have your remote set,
Hmm.
like if I do this, right, now I have a whole new folder here, metadata, that I can add,
Hmm.
right? So now I have two things. Oh, I got to commit.
Can I jump in with a question on here? I mean, and once again, I'm a novice at this, but is there a reason why we still have to work in metadata in for Sandbox? Because I haven't been, once I create the project with manifests, there are some add-ons for VS Code. I think it's Project XML or something like that that will actually pull the source straight from your sandbox, and then I can deploy straight to sandbox from the source.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Is Yeah, okay. So I thought maybe I was cheating the system or something there.
No, no. So you can retrieve, right? Like if I use the retrieve command, I can retrieve metadata from a sandbox. If I use pull, I'm going to pull the source formatted metadata from a scratch org, but I can use retrieve to pull stuff from a scratch org itself.
Right. So is the metadata concept? I mean, I mean, I know it still works and obviously isn't going to be deprecated, but is that kind of like the old way and should be moved away from?
I don't, I haven't heard anything from Salesforce as far as like deprecating the metadata API. I would imagine that would be a very, very out to the future. But from what I see, all of their real, efforts and updates are happening with source, right? So you can even I believe there's a demo, there's a beta pilot So like I demonstrated, the source API tracking your changes from your remote to your local machine, I believe they're going to be doing that feature in Sandboxes itself, and that's happening through the source API. Personally, I wouldn't advise, especially if you're starting a new project or you're taking your project into like a version control. Maybe you don't do that today. I would definitely recommend going to the source format.
Thanks.
Yeah. But back to the previous question, like I just push my metadata to my, the old layout with the package.xml to my version control provider. So maybe there's just an issue with how you have your Git configured, or maybe I didn't understand the question. But you can totally push your metadata to your remote.
Okay, Luigi, I'll just have a look at it again, and maybe I'll reach out to some of your social handles.
You can reach out to me. You could comment me on this public repo if you wanted to. I'd be happy to help out if I can.
All right, that's great.
Yeah,
thank you.
And definitely I will be post out this recording on our ApexR YouTube channel as well as on website with the PPT and all this. You can feel free to add a comment over there, and definitely we will connect and we'll try to post answer over there.
Sure, Amit. It's been a really great platform. Thank you.
And thank you, Luigi, for your great session. And thank you everyone for.
You could, through the metadata API, if I have a destructive package, I could deploy. So what we have in our other project, I have a new folder. I have destructive.
So what I understood, you are keeping another folder for destructive and create a package.xml over there, right?
That's right. Yeah,
that
exactly.
Is what DX is recommending, right?
Yep. Well, I haven't really read that on any of the developer docs, but if I needed to destroy something in an upstream environment like a sandbox or even production, I would definitely recommend tracking that through your version control, because it's just right. It's version control. It's tracking your history. If I have my empty package.xml, right, and then my actual destructive package, which has the references that I want to delete, I can use the metadata commands.
So let me raise one issue here. Okay, so what I face in one of my past project. Okay, so what happens, suppose I have an Apex class that is referencing to some other classes, and I remove that particular reference from the Apex, and then I need to delete the old class. So in that way, what should be the structure for it? Like it should deploy the first of all, it should deploy the changes, then it should execute the destructive, or how it will be handled?
Yeah, you really just have to follow the order of dependencies in your scenario. So it sounds like for you, yeah, you would probably want to deploy your new stuff and then destroy your stuff later. It just depends on the order of dependencies that you have, and that would really dictate your process.
Okay, and one more thing, like suppose like today you deleted one file, that changes are already there in destructive file, and tomorrow another developer is coming and he's deleting that file. But if you use the DX command, so if you know like metadata API, if you found the file, it deleted that file, but if you did not find it, did not give you an error. But in DX, it will give you error saying that file don't found, and it will not delete the old file. Have you faced this issue, or how you handle it?
I haven't ran into that.
Sorry?
I haven't ran into that issue.
Okay. I will connect you offline for this.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And then real quick, guys, too, one of the things I wanted to highlight, I know we're over time, but the power of having like the gated commits in here. So my unit tests are failing right now. So it's not actually going to allow me to merge. I'm an admin, so I have that permission set up. But if I was just a contributor to this project, I wouldn't be able to actually merge onto my upstream branch until my until the checks passed. And in this case, my unit test failed. And it gave me a nice output of what all failed. So I just wanted to highlight that too.
Okay, one more question here, like how you connected your Circle CLI with your GitHub? Did you create any webhook?
Yeah, great question. So, wait, where did it go? That's, yeah, basically exactly what it's an API key right here. Yeah, this, and through Circle CI, so this is all free, by the way. I know it was in that chat, but like I can see some limits and stuff like that. I can see what my usage has been so far. I've used 212 minutes. It's like, it's pretty cool. Add projects. So right here, I connected my GitHub through here. So, you know, before I would have this little connect button like Bitbucket does. I connected to GitHub, and it creates a key up in here, right? Oh yeah, you can also set up an SSH key too in your GitHub to actually SSH into a container. So if your container, if you want to rerun a Docker image like a build, you can SSH into it, and that really helps for troubleshooting too. And I have resources listed out that show you exactly how to do this. But yeah, you just connect. So it just connects and it listens to this project. Right now, all I have is my admin app. But if I wanted to set up something else, right, I could do that. I could set up the project. I'm on Mac, and yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go through all this right now, but yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It steps you through it.
Okay, there's a lots of information for everyone to digest today. And thank you so much for your time over the weekend, and thank you everyone for joining us. Stay connected for our future sessions. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.